How's it going, Smart Start, folks? I am once again your host one of two, Eming Piansay.
And I am host 2 of 2, Sara Robertson. I like that we're doing that now, Eming. I think it's kind of cute of us.
I'll think of other ways to do it. I just
We
got
will.
the Dr. Seuss book in my head and it hasn't
Oh
gone
yeah.
away yet.
Oh yeah.
Thing one, oh yeah, thing one,
Thing
thing
one and
two.
thing two. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Love it. So office Halloween costume next year.
Virtual, but probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Editor one, editor two. No, that
Yeah.
doesn't sound good either. So
All joking aside.
Leaving aside, this is actually a really serious episode, so I apologize for all the laughing. But this episode stemmed from an idea that I had after going to site in Mexico a couple of months ago, and I went to a session on DEI, and it was interesting and really thoughtful, and I really wanted to explore what DEI means now in the meetings industry, now that we have all this stuff going on. So in my article, I spoke with Zoe Moore. She is an EDI strategic consultant, and she offered such great insight into what DEI is and what it can be and how it can be used and how we can evolve from it, how we can be better, and how we can kind of stand our ground in a lot of different ways, at least for the industry itself. And we had a great talk with her, Sara and I.
We did. Yeah. And EDI being equity, diversity, and inclusion, we might be more familiar with DEI. And Zoe makes a really great point, which you'll hear later in the episode, about the importance of actually saying the words of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I do think it's really relevant that she's put equity in the front.
Yeah, she offered us some great, so much thoughtful things that I was just like
incredible,
blown away. I just couldn't even talk about it. I was like, I don't even know what to say. That was like a mic drop moment.
Yes,
for diversity.
Absolutely. She was incredible, and by the way, Eming's article is incredible. So please give it a read. It is a fantastic resource, and she spoke to so many brilliant people.
Yeah, I really hope we can keep having these talks and figuring out like how our industry is responding and feeling and doing what's right and by right of what makes the most sense. And I really hope that we keep having these talks and figuring out what that means for us.
Yes. So enjoy an hour of talking about care, talking about diversity, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and why naps are awesome.
Let's go.
And welcome back to Smart Start Radio. We have a super exciting episode for you today, and we have brought in an absolutely fantastic guest. You may know her as Zoe Moore. She is the founder of Moore Consulting Agency, doing business as Grow with Zomo, and she has done amazing work in DEI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and she is here to talk to us more about this absolutely crucial topic and break it down and how we work it into the meetings industry to make it better for everyone. So, Zoe, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation and meet you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited. So Zoe was featured in our DEI story that I wrote. By the time this comes out, it'll be like a month ago. But it was really good. Like, I really enjoyed writing that. So thank you, Zoe, for being a part of that conversation. And after that conversation, I was like, well, clearly I gotta have her on the podcast now because that was really good.
Obviously. I just have to jump in to say that was such an incredible story. And if you haven't read it, please read it. It was so good and it was so informative and helpful. Read it. I'm going to link it in the show notes for you.
Yeah, and I thank you for the opportunity because every time there are multiple people quoted, I get to add someone new to my network who's same language, who's out there doing the work. And I love to expand my network in that way, so I appreciate it.
So since our listeners may be introduced to you for the first time or may not know a lot about you, could we start off by just going through your background and what Moore Consulting Agency is and what you do and how you built what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in 1980. No, I'm just joking. Um, no, but real quick, I was in the Army, so I am an
Mm,
veteran. I did
right.
12 years in the Army. And a lot of people don't always make the connection between how did you go from being in the Army into events? And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to start the story there.
Mm-hmm.
I learned leadership in the Army.
Mm,
One of the things that I did a lot was go into a very bare space and build that space up to a command center. And that required food and beverage. That required, ebb and flow, ingress, egress, all those type of things. And so I was being prepped to become an event planner long before I even knew.
mm,
And I was telling a colleague recently that there's an event that we do in the military. I don't know if they still do it, called the Grog Bowl. And I was in Korea at the time and I was sourced to do an event. I had to look at the hotel, I had to look at the menu, all these things. And then when I got out, I was honorably discharged and I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be as a civilian. And so initially I went into culinary arts. I was living in Baltimore, Maryland. I had just left the NSA. And I wanted something fun because I was tired of being inside of a building, but I loved engaging people. I loved working at the help desk. I loved helping people through, troubleshooting their different challenges. So culinary school was this fun outlet to meet all kinds of people. And while I was in school, I met Guy Fieri and all just different, individuals in the culinary space, and was just so excited because I was like, wow, you get to meet all these people. So while in culinary school, the dean asked me, like, why are you going for a second undergrad? I see you have an undergrad in IT. You should go for your master's. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take guidance. I applied to different schools. I got into Cal State East Bay in Hayward, California. Up to move from Baltimore, moved back home because I'm originally from the South Bay in Sunnyvale, California.
Oh my gosh, I'm from San Jose.
So that's why JT said you were from Oakland. I was like, she's from Oakland though. I was like, okay, gotcha.
Oakland's a key part to my, journey.
Okay.
But yeah, Hayward's in between San Jose, Oakland. It's right in the area. And so I'm at school, and then one of my professors who I always shout out because he is instrumental in my career, Professor Padron, and he says, hey, let's go to this event by Meeting Professionals International called the Annual Conference and Expo. And I go to this event, and at this particular event, I am introduced to the meetings and events industry, right? Where there's so many different vendors there or booths. There was hotels, there were all kinds of catering companies and activations. And I just did not know that the industry was that extensive. But the issue that I experienced, because my badge said student in bright bold letters with a yellow tab, and I wasn't getting the interaction that I expected from the different folks at different booths. Now, mind you, I was 34 at the time. And so, I'm older, I had been through the military and things like that, but that student badge was determining how different people treated me. And I wasn't happy with that because, Professor Perjon was like, you're going to go to this conference to get a job. And so I had my resume, I had my good suit on and things like that, and as we kind of interacted, different students and I interacted, it was like one of those things where you're like, what is going on? And so I reached out to an MPI member that was on the floor, told her our experience, got Professor Padron, like bringing all these people together to talk to the students and explain to us what this conference is about. So we learned that each person was there representing, their destination or their hotel, and they're looking for event professionals who are going to fulfill an RFP, not necessarily the HR or the hiring people. And that right there is what kicked off me being like, haha, they have a lot of biases on who these students are. And we need to have that conversation about just because these individuals coming to you are students and maybe you're not the correct person for hiring, this is also their first interaction with the company. And so if this is my first interaction and it's a negative one, I'm going to associate your company with my future in the industry. And there needs to be conversation around that. So that led to me starting an inclusion and diversity committee within Meeting Professionals International Northern California chapter. Did that for 2 years. That led to MPI's Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair with Tanita Mullen and John Ellenfeld being our liaison between, that committee and the IBOD, the International Board of Directors. Did that for 2 years, and got a whole bunch of awards. And then, kicking off my business, moving here to Georgia. Now I'm a part of NPI Georgia, where first I served as a director of inclusion, equity and diversity, or community inclusion. And then now I'm just, navigating the current political climate, and glad to be in a space where I get to constantly talk about this topic and let people know that it will never go anywhere, no matter what the acronym is or the person who's leading the administration, no matter how much angst or pushback they give. So that's my story in short.
About a month ago, I wrote a story on DEI, and I spoke with Zoe as part of it, and she was really great, and I loved the conversation, and I was like, we have to have this on the podcast, because as much as I think this issue has been discussed, I don't think it's been discussed in depth enough where I feel like our community really understands like how important DEI is, and I think that we really need to bring it down to base level, kind of define what it is, why it's important, and why our industry needs it, and why we should be supporting it and not standing in the middle of the road waiting for which light to turn green at this point, because that's where we're at, unfortunately. Yeah. So
I will pop in to say that Eming's story was incredible, and you should absolutely read it, and we will link it in the show notes for you.
Yeah, doing articles or speaking on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you will hear me now say all the words, right? And that's key in this conversation, because, when we allow it to become weaponized, it begins with people creating the acronym as a monolith, DEI, DEI. Yeah. And then, like you spoke earlier, people don't know what it means. So let's actually say the words. Because it sparks a conversation among people. And that conversation ends with someone who says that they're unsure about DEI, or they're not for that DEI thing, And so I begin to ask them questions. I'm like, oh, okay, so you're okay with people being excluded and marginalized and not cared for? No, right. I'm not for that. Okay, so you actually believe in inclusion? Yeah, of course. Okay. And you're okay with things being inequitable. You're okay with women not being paid equally to their male counterparts, or you're okay with, inequality across education, housing, healthcare. No. I think things should be, equitable, or I think equality is a good thing. Okay, so you're not against equity. And then same with diversity, you're okay with the room being homogenous, or all men being in leadership, or all women, being in domesticated roles. No, of course not. Okay, so you're okay with diversity. So you have no problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've just been, sucked in to this propaganda that DEI is a negative thing, this thing. When actually,
why do you I mean, I'm curious, why do you think that's happened? Like, the term DEI has become somewhat of it's gained somewhat of a negative connotation. People are like, oh, like, I'm not involved in this whole DEI thing. Why do we have this view of it, and like, when did that come about?
I think it's not new, right? And so as a practitioner in this space, you also become a historian, especially in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, because it's connected to the civil rights movement and even movements before that. So when you look at civil rights movement, or the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the backlash that we're seeing is just a repeat of the past, right? And so just because legislation got passed, it doesn't mean that it changed the social attitudes and the behaviors of those who were okay with laws like Jim Crow laws that legalized segregation, where we used to, in this country, not even 100 years ago, used to have signs that said white only and colored only, right? That is our history. And there's a lot of different incidents, occurrences that is associated with that history that people don't want to talk about because it's uncomfortable. Now, here we are again in, 2025, where there's an executive order wanting to return to those same types of segregation laws. And so we're seeing it because people, one, because the education system has not talked about this subject in a way that people can fully understand it. You know, it's our past, our history has been romanticized and also told through the perspective. And I often say this, told through the perspective or the lens of the victor and not the victimized. And so when we do that, we try to erase, the residual and ongoing impact of not only those laws, but as far back as colonization, all these things that we're seeing patterns of creep back up into the rhetoric, into the political sphere. And the more you keep people uneducated, the more that they fall prey to the propaganda, or they don't fully understand what each word means and what the intended outcome is or supposed to be.
Yeah.
So
it's a weird cycle, because if you cut like the history part, like if you remove information from websites, or you force schools to stop teaching these things, like it's all connected. Like, even though education is its own entity, which is also a whole other story and conversation itself, if you remove that aspect, other areas of the system like don't become as, that they don't know as much.
Right.
And so it's all like one, it's a human body essentially. One organ fails, everything else starts acting funny too.
Yeah.
So DEI is the same way.
Yeah. And explaining it to people like that I love how you broke it down in different organs. It's an ecosystem. Everything is connected. We are all within our society, within our collective, responsible for each other, right? And the way that we talk to each other, the way that we support each other. Whether that's a family unit, whether that's a work unit, community, we're all connected. Right. And I, as a practitioner, I'm certified diversity practitioner. Education to me is the key, right? And, when I'm doing this work, and I do it specifically within the hospitality, events, and tourism industry, I've been in spaces where people do ask me that question about, what is this DEI thing? What is diversity? How does it apply to me as an event professional or in this industry? And before I get into the business, the operations, the decision-making that they have and how it relates to that, I do start with those definitions. And one of the key things that I see when people have become so susceptible to the propaganda is that they think of diversity as a very binary topic, that it's us versus them, that it's men against women, that it's Black against white, that it's gay against heterosexual, and it's this pitting against each other. When we get past that part of the conversation, or as I unfold that particular topic, I get into, this is something that you're actually doing every single day, is designing experiences where everybody feels seen, heard, and valued, right? You make decisions on the food that people are going to eat. You make decisions on the event being accessible. You make sure that people can hear the speaker, that the speaker has a varied background so that they're interesting. So all these decisions that you're making are based on making sure that the environment, the experience you're creating is diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
Right.
Now, the ask is that you do so with more intention and more strategic.
So that's something that I wanted to ask about. I do have a thought that I want to share. And I think that like this industry, particularly the events that we hold, like these industry events have such power for a ripple effect, because you bring together all of these people who are involved in this industry, whether they're DMOs, planners, suppliers, they're all going to an event. They see diversity, equity, and inclusion in action applied with like intention, and they see the benefits, and then they can all go back to their companies, especially planners, and then mimic that themselves for all of their attendees. Like the ripple just grows and grows. So like, it is not to be underestimated, the power that planners have to really, really make a positive difference.
Yeah.
Like when we say one person can change the world, you really can.
Yeah.
You really can.
I was telling you in the beginning how, I went to school, hospitality, recreation, and tourism when I was getting my master's. My dissertation, the title of it was, it was, let me remember because it was a long title. It was basically, addressing underrepresented communities one event at a time. Like
Nice.
how can we um, build sustainable communities through events? And that was the subject that I was focusing on. So it evolved into what I do now, but that's the conversation that we need to have is social sustainability, which leads to environmental sustainability and so forth and so on.
Yeah. So one of the central pillars of your company is insight to implementation. So would you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do we create insight and what does that process look like from going from insight to implementation? And what does successful implementation look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, all of that, work and the use of insights implementation began with a course that I built about almost 4 years ago. So that lives with PCMA, Event Leadership Institute. And it's called the Event DEI Strategist course. So insights implementation is a framework. And I highly suggest that anyone who's engaging in this work, and I was, consulting organizations and consulting committees and individuals, is that you need a framework to guide the process, or you will get lost in the weeds and overwhelmed by all the things that you can do. And so the insight being phase one is gathering insight. You have to identify what is the current, status of your supply network, right? So you have a whole bunch of suppliers, and when you look through that list of suppliers that you're working with, whether they be hotels, whether they be photographers, catering companies, florists, and now let's look down into the demographics of those different companies. What is the size of the company? Are there any small businesses? Are there any Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses? And ask yourself those questions, gather that insight. So that's how you look at your supplier network. You look internal to your organization. What does your staff look like? What does your clientele look like? So you gather insight to understand how you're currently doing business and where are there opportunities for growth. And then you move into phase two, where now that you've gathered this insight, you inform, the executive suite, or you inform the particular, stakeholder that is asking these questions or that you're planning to work with. So you inform them. Phase three is you move into this realm where you're now putting these ideas together, how you can look at those opportunities for growth and make a plan for it, where you only focus, because you're going to find a lot of information in phase one that you could focus on, but narrow those down to 3, no more than 5, so that you can actually do the work and not get overwhelmed. And in that template that I use within this framework, there's a parking lot. So you can identify there's other areas that you want to work on, but that they're not the top priority immediately. And then you get into implementation. You start implementing these things and seeing where, you have enough resources or you don't, whether those resources are money, whether it's the capacity of your team, the knowledge of your team, and you assess yourself through this implementation. And then as you are implementing, of course, you have to, make adjustments. You have to either invest more money, more time, more capacity, and things like that. And then as you refine that implementation, you iterate. So to repeat it back over again, you're constantly gathering insight. You're constantly informing what worked, what you should sustain, what you should improve on. You're constantly innovating. You're constantly implementing. And it's, my favorite number is 8. So I draw it like the infinity symbol. It's a journey. It's not a destination.
Right.
Say, oh, we tried it. It didn't work out. You say, we need to do better the next time. And so I use framework to guide my clients through a process. So I can ask them, what did you implement? And, who was involved? Who was informed? Things like that. And so, the frameworks are very helpful. And as people have taken this course over the last 4 years, I often, because we have a forum which they can engage with each week. It's a 7-week asynchronous course. And people often write dissertations, or they're like light bulbs have just went off, right? Like,
that's
now
amazing.
I can take this and use this framework to really put forth the ideas. that I've had about what it looks like to be committed as a company. Because I always say
Right.
people express their commitment, but they're
Mhm.
not intentional with it. And
Yeah.
so it allows them to be intentional.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, how can this industry be more intentional? Because the events industry is the whole point of it is people coming together. That's the main theme.
Yeah.
So, if if DEI is like kind of in this weird spotlight of like, do we want to engage with it? Do we want to talk about it? Do we want to have it? Someone I spoke to said that it supports your ROI because that's really what you want.
Yes.
It's all about money at the end of the day, really, if we're being honest. So embracing DEI supports that.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
in your opinion, where do you see that heading?
I smile because you said the ROI, right? And
Mhm.
I know that so many people understand that it is about making money. That's great. We all need income to be able to enjoy our leisure activities and to take care of our fixed, things that we, our mortgage, our car notes, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But within this industry, we have to understand, the economic impact of our industry globally and domestically. And we're a couple of weeks away from, actually not even a week, we're about a week away from Global Meetings Industry Day, which talks about economic impact of the industry. So you have to finish the sentence. It's about making money, but where does that money go?
Right.
How does that money benefit the destinations, the company, the community? And that goes back to my thesis, right? Is that if we understand that one event that has, I think the report says 75 attendees create 7 jobs, right? And I think I have my numbers off, but I can pull up that information. But you're looking at, the staff that's running the venue, you're looking at the catering company, you're looking at the photographer, you're looking at all the jobs that are created. And if those are created within a community, you've not only brought income to those individuals, they can invest back into their community. And you're also bringing foot traffic into that destination. So they're spending at hotels, they're spending at restaurants, right? So when we talk about, our work in this industry as an ecosystem, our events are giving back to those destinations, shining a light onto that destination, bringing people to places they may have never been, learning about the history, learning about the challenges, the beauty, all of that, within an event. And so it's so much more than just what is happening within your event. It's the impact the event makes.
Right.
That ripple effect. You mentioned it earlier, right? Ripple effect that an event has. Oftentimes, I don't think an event planner who's caught up in their checklist with their they often understand that ripple effect.
Right.
And that conversation about DEI. Do you understand? In my thesis, one of the things I wrote about was the Grand Prix in Baltimore. And so it's great to talk about how fast the cars are and how many attendees and people love the Grand Prix. But what we weren't talking about was how many streets had to be cut off during the Grand Prix. And when streets are blocked, it prevents people from getting to their medical appointments and getting to their jobs. And so how we as event planners become aware of the impact that we have on these destinations, both in positive and negative ways, so that we can make better and in more informed decisions.
Absolutely. And I would say that Destinations International is a great resource for this. So by the time that this episode comes out, we'll actually be coming up on the 2025 annual conference in Chicago. But I was there last year at the 2024 in Tampa Bay. And following that conference, they released a Tampa Bay case study on the immense impact that the event had on the community, not only in terms of, driving economic growth in the community, creating jobs, getting people to dine out at restaurants and experience the locale, people got connected with the culture. Like, one of the things that's huge in Tampa Bay is this Cuban culture that a lot of people were concerned about coming to Tampa Bay because there were these tense political discussions and this tense political atmosphere. And people were like, I don't really want to go to Tampa Bay because I don't agree with the politics. And then they come and they see this massive Cuban culture, and they never would have known about that if they hadn't gone out there. That's what meeting planners do. I think at the end of the day, and maybe it makes me naive. I don't really care. I think that yes, it's about money, but like there are so many ways you can make money. Why are you a meeting planner? Like you chose to make money by way of helping people and helping people feel connected
Yeah.
and helping people to experience the mind-opening, eye-opening experience of travel and connecting to a destination authentically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now, but
No,
yeah.
I love it. You speak to something that's very important. We talk about the hierarchy of needs, right? Making money is actually not on the top of those needs. It's honestly what you can do with that money or what comes with making that money, right? The communities that you can build, that sense of belonging that people yearn for, feeling fulfilled in your day-to-day activities. And so as much as people have their own personal bottom line, there's things that are associated with that. And if you're a part of a company that isn't inclusive of people within the workplace and to whom it serves, that's where people struggle and they have internal conflict with doing that work, whether they admit that publicly or not. You know?
So I think that this is a topic where supplier diversity plays a really big role, and I know that you're a proponent of that, so that's why I'm asking you about this. But let's talk about supplier diversity and the impact that it makes.
Yeah, and I spoke to it briefly earlier, and as I was on my own journey, like we're all on this journey of learning about ourselves, because even in the course I talk about like the first week, the first 2 weeks are really understanding history, but also checking your own emotional intelligence, having some self-awareness, having some awareness. But as I was on my journey, I initially started my business more focused on Black and Brown businesses. And I will always forever be focused on, the melanated and marginalized, right? Because of the history of this country. And when you look across, the communities, it is Black and Brown communities that are disproportionately impacted, right? And so when we bring that into the conversation around businesses, I was having that conversation where I just wanted to see more Black and Brown faces within NPI, at the events. We weren't getting the information that we needed. And so that led to a panel discussion. And I remember this vividly. We were at, I think, the Julia Morgan Ballroom in San Francisco. And I was on a panel with Edward Parati, Gary Lori Pugh. Like there was just so many people on the, not Lori Pugh, I'm getting Lori is with MPI, but I remember Lori's last name. But we were on this panel talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, I was coming from that lens of I need to get more Black and Brown faces here. Like I said, ever a mission. But after we had the conversation, speaking through the LGBTQ lens for Gary and Edward, talking from the Asian lens, Gary was representing that. We were just talking about all kinds of topics. When we got off stage, out of my left side, I could see my salad. I was so hungry. I wanted to eat. And out of the right side, I saw a line of people who, in that line, there were people with tattoos, there were women, there were gay people, there were just people who had all kinds of input based on the conversation. They were like, some people won't hire me because I have tattoos. Some people won't hire me because, I'm blonde and they think I'm not this. And there's all these biases they were presenting, and I'm like, food over there. But I'm so intrigued that so many people have so much to say about not being seen, valued, and heard. And so my ability as an advocate began to expand. I started to feel more like, if you're familiar with Fred Hampton, it was the movement of the Rainbow Coalition, that we are together, we are stronger, right? That we have the same challenges. You may be a white woman and I'm a Black woman. And while our different nuanced experiences and challenges may be different, by us working together, we get more done, right? And so it evolved, right? And so that gets me to how I got to supplier diversity, because I realized that in order to have this conversation as a practitioner within this space, I had to speak to business folks. And I would do presentations in the beginning that would say diversity, equity, and inclusion in the marquee. And a specific group of people would get up and leave. And that would be the finance team. They'd be like, okay, this conversation doesn't pertain to me. But then I started changing the title of my presentation to be more inclusive. And I said, how can I make you money, save you money, and help you stop losing money? The finance people stop leaving, right? And so they're sitting there at the workshop and we're talking through supplier diversity. How, if business is supposed to be competitive, and when is the last time that you looked at your suppliers to make sure not only are their prices, are they fitting with your budget and your bottom line, but are their services also exceeding the expectations of your clients, and what are the demographics of the companies that you're working with? Are you sending out this RFP to more businesses who may be innovative, who are, trying to compete to get into the market, but because you're just doing the same, event over and over again, clients are just like, okay, I'm just going to come to the event because I'm used to coming. But by bringing in more vendors, more diverse suppliers, you get innovative ideas and creativity. And so supplier diversity, I started speaking on that topic more and more. And again, it was a strategic way of let me gather that insight about your supplier diversity, network, or if you have, a preferred vendor list. Okay, you have this preferred vendor list of caterers, but only, demographics that are on your preferred catering list are large white-owned businesses. And here's an opportunity because in the location that you're in, like starting with like the Oakland Museum, the community around here are Filipino, they're Indian. And when I look at your menu, none of those catering companies know how to best serve, ethnic foods. Right. And so you're missing out on clients and opportunities. So by diversifying your catering list, you could actually attract clients from different groups. And if you know anything about Southeast Asians in their weddings, they're very large and they're multiple days. And so if you're the person, who is talking about the impact on your ROI or your bottom line, you might want to get clients who are from different ethnic groups. And then in keeping with that, when I worked with, Indian weddings, it would be the auntie and the uncle who are planning the event, and they didn't trust everybody to plan that event because there's a lot of culture traditions that are involved. And a lot of event planners weren't they weren't well educated, or they didn't know about those traditions and cultures. They were trying to plan those events through a very Eurocentric or Western lens. And so here were opportunity that supplier diversity, introduced, engaging with more businesses across, ethnic demographics, diversifying that preferred vendor list, and also educating event planners that there's more different types of wedding traditions than what you see within European cultures. And so that just really, again, light bulbs went off in people's brains. And then I got to connect to the history of supplier diversity, which started all the way back in 1970s after the assassination of Dr. King. So it became a way that I could have a really fruitful conversation with people because they could do the work on their own. They could look at their preferred vendor list and be like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving money on the table. So yes, that is a topic I can talk about for days.
So it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
That's fine. So for folks who aren't, that's not their issue, like it's not ROI, they just like have this sense of like DEI bad, like that's it, like that's just their brick in the road and they're not moving from it. How do we engage those people to be like, hey, let's talk about this at least so that we can come to some kind of at least understanding that DEI isn't like the boogeyman, like it's not gonna come steal you or your job or anything. It's just it actually makes business better. So how do we change the narrative so that it's not these buzzwords that invoke emotion and not logic?
And why are we so hung up on the buzzwords?
Yeah, well, it's easy.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a quote that I use. I love to use quotes because I think quotes, like movie clips, like images, do evoke emotion and really spark conversation.
Agreed.
So the one quote that I love, one of many, is by James Baldwin, rights
I
advocate.
love James Baldwin.
Yeah, Harlem Renaissance,
Mhm.
amazing. And he says, and I probably won't say it verbatim, but the premise of his quote is that we can agree to disagree and still love each other so long as our disagreement or your disagreement with me is not rooted in you denying my right to exist, right?
Mhm.
And so when engaging people who are on the fence about the topic of whether or not all people should be included, that equity is beneficial to all of us as a society, that diversity is good for us economically, socially, and all the things. If they're on the fence because they don't fully understand the acronym DEI, or there have been some subjects that have been introduced and they didn't feel inclusive, uh, we can work with that, right? We can have this conversation. But if the pushback or the apathy is rooted in hate and the denial of people's existence and their right to exist, I'm gonna let you sit with that on your off to the side, right? Because that's a lot of energy to expel towards me.
Mhm.
But I would still encourage those individuals because as an individual, I don't know if we talked about this, but I like to watch Fox News and I like to watch different media outlets that may not always agree with my values,
Mhm.
but I watch them to stay informed. And and so reading that conservative news and hearing the different perspectives also led to people who identified as conservative MAGA supporters in my inbox on LinkedIn, wanting to have a
Mhm.
conversation. And they would chime into my inbox and I would say, and one individual in particular, hey, you seem to have very productive conversations and I want to talk to you. And I said, okay, we can establish some
Okay.
boundaries. And that boundary was rooted in that James Baldwin quote.
Mhm.
I'll gladly point to documentaries you can watch, movies that you can
Mhm.
watch, conversations, articles, all of that. But my boundary is when you start, degrading or disrespecting any identity and believe that they don't have a right to exist.
Mhm.
And so by the end of the conversation, did I change his entire way of thinking? No. I planted some seeds and encouraged and challenged him to do the work, challenge your biases,
Mhm.
stop confirming them. If
Mhm.
I, as a practitioner, can listen to Fox News and read other conservative
Mhm.
articles, you do the same. You go read liberal information,
Mhm.
read the data,
Yeah.
and make an informed decision, not
Yeah.
based on someone trying to convince you to, and we talked about it, this whole idea of being woke, being negative. I had to ask myself the question when people say that woke was a negative thing or being
Mhm.
negative. I want constituents of any particular state or, region to ask themselves, why does my leaders or why does a politician want me to be asleep? What are they doing?
Mhm.
Why
That.
am I asleep? What
That.
war are they pulling over my eyes, right? What
Yeah.
laws are being passed that are going to hurt me having the ability to purchase eggs? Okay, eggs, my favorite eggs are now $9.90.
Yes.
Eggland's Best are my favorite eggs, and I have never seen them so expensive. And so that must have happened when I was asleep. So I want to be woke. I want to
Yeah.
be awake and aware. And that's
Mhm.
not a negative thing because if that means
Mhm.
educated, I'm doing some critical thinking, I'm engaging in critical dialogue, and that's negative to you, then
Mhm.
you're not my people.
Yeah.
On the
I
line.
think I think you make a really important point linking woke to being awake, because I think like so many times like with slang, like we forget like where the word comes from, but woke literally means to like be
Yeah.
awake, to be aware. And I admire you for having these conversations with people who disagree with you, who you disagree with, and reading these news outlets, because like I think that existing in an echo chamber is so dangerous.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's just I think it's something that like I learned, like a high school teacher said once in a class, like a history class or something, that like if you aren't having conversations with people that disagree with you or that you disagree with,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just talking to people that you agree with, you are not going to learn and you are not going to grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do this exercise. I love interactive exercises because in this space where I'm trying to educate people, education is not where I talk at you and tell you what to think. It's me encouraging you to think critically about any topic. And so one of the exercises is an ABC exercise, and it's the affinity bias chart, right? And so I have people take out a blank page, and on the top, they list out people who are within their circle of influence, right? And so you list out 6 individuals, that you're really close to, that you call and talk to. You can do your circle of influence. You could look at the movies that you watch and the directors of those movies. You could look at books and the authors of those books. List out their names. On the left side, there's a column, and it's demographic information from gender, from generation or age, disability or ability, sexual orientation. Just list all the different, and I really focus on federally protected characteristics. That people understand there's laws that had to pass in order to protect people based on the religion that they practice. And so really use that list. Now the exercise is to look at each individual person within your circle of influence and look at their demographic information.
Right.
Once you complete the chart, step back and look at the patterns. Are all the people within your circle of influence within the same generation or age? And are you that person who says, well, back in my day, when I was younger, well, if you're not talking to younger people, you know nothing about them. Like, I really respect my 20-year-old son, Jordan, right? He's 20, he goes to college. And when he speaks, I listen to him, not from a perspective of I know more because I'm older than you, but what wisdom can he share with me? And same, go back to that chart again, and you ask yourself, am I only around white people? Am I only around conservatives? Am I only around liberals? Even for liberals or people who are, all about human rights, you also have to be around people who are in opposition of people's human rights. Again, with the boundary that you set to protect your peace, but you have to hear their perspective. Like J. Vance has a movie, The Hillbilly Elegy, right? I watched it. I watched it with an open mind I want to know, what is life like in the Appalachian Mountains, right? I don't know that community. What resources are they lacking? And what is the propaganda being pushed to people who are fighting to have jobs and healthcare, right? If we connect it back to history, we understand that what's being pushed to them is that it is the immigrants who are taking your jobs. It's Black people who are taking your jobs. So if I can pit you against each other, right? And so that chart helps you understand the thinking of the people within your circle of influence and why you might live in an echo chamber. Now, how and what are you going to do to break out of that echo chamber is you're going to diversify, just like your supplier diversity list or a preferred vendor. You're going to diversify your circle of influence, or the books that you read, the movies that you watch, the news outlets that you go to, so that you can actually seek to challenge your biases and not to confirm them. And so that helps us now. That's education. Education is questioning what you're learning, not just to memorize what somebody's telling you, but to actually process it and be like, I have more questions. I always encourage doing that exercise. And again, when people do the exercise, whether in an in-person workshop that I've done many times or online, the dissertations that I receive, the light bulbs that go off for people, the tears that I've seen people in, because they're like, I never knew some of these things that you're presenting. I never knew about Jim Crow laws. I never knew about the incarceration system. I never knew that people in Georgia only get paid $7.25 an hour. I never knew, whatever they didn't know, it wasn't in their face because that's almost by design. Right.
Yeah. Once again, I think I'll just reiterate what Zoe said earlier. When we work together, when we talk to each other, when we work together, we get so much more done.
Yes. Yeah.
We have so much more power.
Absolutely. I do the visual of a fist, right? And so if you hold out your hand and, just individual fingers, and you have to, fight for your life, and you just try to punch with your thumb or you punch with your index finger, what will happen to those individual fingers? you'll more than likely break them or stub them really bad and it hurts. But collectively, if as individuals, if we represent that, each finger in the hand, and we come together, and that's where you see that representation of the fifth, is that power to the people, right? We are now a force to reckon with, and we have more power in this fist. Bruce Lee used to just do one quick punch.
Right.
Was more powerful than just a pinky operating by itself.
Yeah.
So that is what the whole collective and the community and you know, us talking about civil rights, is that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and heard, right? And for those who are disproportionately impacted, their voices are loud because there's a desperate need to make sure that I can sustain it within my community, I can sustain within my identity, and that I'm not denied the right to exist. And so do that work within the meetings and event space by bringing people together to be educated on those topics, to see individuals within their community or outside of their community, and learn that they are human beings, right? And that's what it comes down to.
We're just humans trying to have meetings. Why can't we just do that?
Seriously.
Why are we gonna make it so complicated?
I wonder.
We're human.
We are complex humans, but it's sad to me. Like I had this conversation with a colleague, and I'm just I'm lost for words. That's exactly what I feel. I don't know why people have so much hate in their heart, you know. And I just want to breathe. I want to exist. I want to interact with people and eat and travel and sleep. I love taking a good nap, and I don't want to constantly have to think about how much somebody hates me when I enter into a room, all because of some socially constructed, you know, identity that has created these barriers.
Right.
Like, so
we're all people at the end of the day.
Right.
It's a matter of spin and whatever else is going outside of the meetings industry that is really causing all the stress of it, unfortunately. And I really hope.
We are a people-centric business. We are industry.
Yeah, we are.
We have to have this conversation because we are constantly people, you know.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Very true. Sarah, do you have any questions left, or do you want to drop the last question?
I would like to talk a little bit about, you know, how we can incorporate more authentic DEI in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to actually start saying the whole adage. That's one thing I've learned here. So how can we authentically incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into an event space? Like, think about like a hypothetical event. What are some of the there's a fly in here, sorry. What are some of the things that like I feel like this episode is gonna have a lot of bloopers. Maybe we should do a blooper reel.
I had it like 3 times. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. So when you walk into an event, like what are some of the things that tells you like this event is doing diversity, equity, inclusion authentically, like with intention?
Yeah, it starts before anybody even arrives at the event, right? For those that have cognitive disabilities or that, you know, have sight or hearing, you know, challenges that they experience, it starts with the registration page, right? It starts with the colors that you're using, the font that you're using, the navigation to get around the registration, the information that lets me know that, you know, the safety protocols, the transportation protocols, what kind of, on the registration form, does it ask about my food preferences and restrictions? You know, it begins there. And then when people arrive into a space or even a destination, are people aware of the history of the destination? That matters, right? And you know, if it's a building that's right across from a statue that has some historical, baggage attached to it, are you aware of the placement of your venue and whose land is it on? Is it indigenous land? You know, are you paying respect to whose land it is, right? When you walk in physically to a space, you know, sound matters, lights matter, the warmth of the facility. Like it get into those details. And as event planners, we're thinking about all these things, right? How security engages with people, right? Are you assuming that the person who's in sneakers is invited into the space and the person who's in, maybe not dressed up in business casual isn't? Or is color of skin preventing, the way that you engage people at registration or security? And so it gets into those details. But overall, when you're at an event and we're looking at breakout sessions, or we're looking at the general and main stage, the people who are, delivering the content, the speakers and how they're represented, are they from different, backgrounds and identity groups, and the way the content is delivered. If it's people who are speaking different languages, do we have captions on the screen? Do we have, we could go through every single detail, speakers to food and beverage to location, giving people time to rest. That became a really big thing post-COVID, where instead of having these back-to-back sessions where people are drained and exhausted at the end of the day, people want time to just sit and breathe and interact with each other, or even go back to their hotel room and take a nap. I love that.
Yeah.
Right?
A good nap during an event.
And so what it does, and to some people it can feel overwhelming, but these are all details that we're thinking about. And this is why you have a team who is a subject matter expert in a particular area, right? Someone who's managing registration, and you're thinking about what is that experience that, these different personas, these different identities have when they come up to registration. What is the tone of the people who are delivering customer service, right? And so we have to think through these details, and we're thinking about the details not just through the lens of one identity. We have to think about the impact and what hinders somebody having a good experience, and what provides an accessible experience. It is our responsibility as an event planner, and that is meeting the needs of our stakeholders, and every stakeholder, from your attendees to the vendors to the speakers, your team, right? There's all different types of stakeholders, and we have to engage them as human beings who want to be seen, heard, and valued. Yeah, so I walk through event planners. I walk through this with event planners, with companies who are suppliers, to think through the details. And usually, it gets down to one particular group. I remember working with an organization who a large part of their attendees were formerly incarcerated. And so a lot of times when someone has been formerly incarcerated, when they come out, they don't have an ID. Now, part of the check-in process at a hotel, what do they ask you for, right? A credit card and an ID. Now, that person who's formerly incarcerated doesn't want to be like, hey, I was just locked up 10 days ago and I don't have an ID, because what is that reaction going to be from that lobby host or that, And so they wanted to figure out ways to reduce that particular experience, like how to reduce the fear and trepidation, the experience. And so we talk through those details. It's not about always having the answers. It's the fact that you have to address that conflict exists, right? And what is the training that we need to demystify that particular conflict? But what we're used to as people is we avoid conflict. Let's just not act like it doesn't exist. When you avoid conflict, it is conflict.
Yeah.
And so we just train people to think about social equity responses. How do you train the hotel? How do you train your staff? And how do you, by working together with your supplier, with your team, create the most inclusive and equitable experience for each of your guests? And then when they give you feedback that their experience was not the greatest or it was great, what do you do with that information?
I think it's interesting when you talk about conflict and how we avoid it. I think that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have some people that are huge proponents of it and they're doing great work. We have some people that don't even want to hear it. But then I think the vast majority of people are in the middle, somewhere along this line spectrum. And I think that when people feel uncomfortable talking about DEI, maybe we can reframe that as like it's a signal that there is conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
we can't shy away from conflict
Yeah.
if we want to make progress.
Yeah. When I think about it from that lens, right, a lot of people, especially now in this time, those who are hesitant to speak up because they could lose their job, they're going through, uh, you know, trying to acquire new clients and they're afraid of their reaction and things like that. I think back again, I connect everything that's currently happening to history because it has this residual and impact. So, Martin Luther King Jr. was locked up. And while he was locked up at one point, he wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail. And what
Right.
he
Yeah.
wrote to was, you know, that it was the moderate, it was the person in the middle
Yes.
he was most worried about, right?
Mhm.
And the reason why he was worried about them is because they're, again, such a large group. But when you are silent about things that you know are detrimental to our society,
Mhm.
you're worse than the person who is an overt racist. You're worse,
complicit.
right? And so in that space of your fear, of your hesitation, of your I don't know if I should speak up, that's exactly when you should speak up. And even when we have this comparison as of late with what's going on to 1933 Germany, there's that poem that comes up where it says, first they came for my neighbor and I said nothing. Then they came for my friend, I said nothing. They came for my enemy, I said nothing. Then they came for me and there was nobody to say anything for me, right? And so we have to make a decision, and I know event planners are like, well, I'm not an activist, I don't know how to speak up. I'm not an advocate. Yes, you are, because for yourself, for your family, you care about their future generations. You care about your parents, your grandparents, your friends, your coworker, and each one of those individuals are different from you. It doesn't have, a white person caring for a black person, a white person caring for, it's not just about this binary. It's about humans caring for humans.
Mhm.
All of that's going on, like, I try to educate people who think they're so against like the transgender community. I said, everything that they're trying, to build laws or create or pass laws against the transgender community, those laws are going to be turned right back on you as well. So you need to realize that this marginalized community that doesn't have a voice alone needs our collective voice, because those laws are discriminatory and those discriminatory laws are going to impact me as well. I care about every single human. And so it is important that we understand the history, and that's why people are sounding the alarms, so they understand how this gradually became, something that we talk about now that's written in our history books. So we have to speak up, because as it begins, and you see it on LinkedIn now, more and more people within the meetings and events industry are talking about it on LinkedIn, because everything that's happening is impacting that ROI, is impacting.
Yep.
The more you start, attacking immigrants and doing all these things, immigrants make up a large portion of the workforce, right? And people traveling from around the world, if they know they're not safe to come to the US, guess what happens to the economy within the US travel, right? And so we have to connect the dots. Whether you think this pertains to you or not, whether you don't what you don't understand, you go learn, and it does pertain to you. No matter who you are, it pertains to you, it impacts you, and it's a conversation that we need to engage.
I don't know if I should feel empowered or a little bit nervous, but that was
You're invited to feel all the emotions.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel all of them every single day. I feel joy that I'm invited to have this conversation. I feel fear because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
I embrace all my emotions.
We'll walk that road together at this point, because that's the only way we're going to get through this.
Absolutely. Yes. We walk the road together.
As it started to unfold, and when I mean by that, mid-January, as things started to really, oh, okay, this is really happening. One of the first posts that I put on LinkedIn was, the work is done in community, right? It's us having the conversations. It's us finding out what hopefully what we can do within our career, within our workplace, within our community. All the work begins in community, us finding together.
Yes.
So that's where I'll begin. That's where I'm continuing. Like now, I was just telling you that I work at Riverside Epicenter. And the reason why, I've been an entrepreneur all my life. Well, my life after the military, I have many lives, like I said. And I was an entrepreneur for 10 years, and I took this role because now I get to be a part of something bigger than myself. That is a physical location, and I get to be a resource. I get to go out to the community and say, oh, you need to plan an event. I have this beautiful venue that I want you to see. And within this space, the team is talented. I get to meet all these amazing people. I don't have to sit in isolation as an entrepreneur or solopreneur by myself every single day. I can come into a space and meet and greet people and interact with human beings because that's what I do, right?
Yeah.
And I get to support a business who more people need to know about. And so again, I align my need for income with my values and with myself. So
It's smart. It's very smart.
Yeah.
I wish I embraced that earlier in my life when I was young and didn't know what I believed in. But it's definitely advice that I think the younger folks need to embrace and move forward with.
I do think that, all of the professionals listening to this are in careers where they align their income with their values. Being involved in tourism and hospitality and events, like you care about people at its most basic, and you are spending your time every day making people feel cared for.
Right.
That's what it's about.
Yeah. Hospitality, right?
It is
hospitality. Back to the definition of hospitality.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what it is. I empathy comes from a place, empathy versus sympathy, right? Empathy comes from a place of putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Right.
And knowing that is not the experience that you want to have. So you're not going to give someone else that experience. And you're going to realize the impact of what their experience on them. And you recognize that, again, back to the quote with James, I do not have the right to deny somebody the right to exist, the right to be human, right? For us, and I haven't met either one of you in person, right? But just from talking to you and reading the article that was written, I know we're like-minded, right? In the way that this is common sense to us, right? It's like, duh, like, yeah, like human beings, they need love, they need shelter, they need health care, they need a wonderful event to enjoy and interact with people. This is common sense. So our responsibility within the space of it being common sense is to work with people who are on their journey.
Right.
And not act in a way, you don't heal people by, attacking them with a violent or, being defensive about what you believe. You realize you're on a different part of your journey and they're learning. And so asking questions, providing definitions, providing documentaries and resources, books that they can read, and then creating that space where they can ask questions.
Yes.
That's what this work is doing. That's the responsibility that I feel when people reach out to me. How can I help them have this conversation?
Absolutely.
Well, next question for you.
Okay.
Questions is something we ask all our guests at the end of each show, and it's basically what is in your box of resources, your toolbox. What's something that has impacted you or happened to you or that you've taken from life that has really made you who you are today and helped you kind of deal with all of this?
Yeah. What do you want people listening to this episode to walk away with?
Be curious. That has been a very useful tool in my toolbox is curiosity. In an industry where, I often say we have an alphabet soup, right? We have PI, the PCMA, the ILEA, like all these acronyms, DI. We were like, huh? And then network, people will say all these acronyms. Are you a CMP? Do you have your PMP? And I'm like, what can you tell me what that is? Can you define that? How do I get that? How do I get CEs and CECs and like break it down and then tell me who I should contact and what should I read, right? I had a lot of curiosity. And so now 10 years into my career, people who have been in for 30 years is like, how is your network so, big or, expansive? I said, because I ask a lot of questions, right? I'm very curious. I want to know what is the difference between